Hello and welcome to another edition of 310 to Left. Tom Caron from Nesson along with Alex Speier, the Boston Globe, as always. The edition we didn't want to bring you. This is the why the Red Sox didn't make the playoffs and what do they have to do to get back there next year edition. Probably won't get to all of that because it won't be that long. So don't worry, settle in. Alex, you wrote a terrific piece that we can use as sort of the jumpstart on this. And when you laid it out, I had no idea how, I think you said 20 of the 30 teams since the expanded playoffs in 2022 have been to the postseason. The Red Sox are in the lower third, one of 10 teams that have not. When you lay it out like that, it is pretty staggering how this 3-year drought has happened in a world where almost everybody else makes the postseason.
Yeah, it's been a bizarre run, right? Like we have the kind of simulacra of like meaningful baseball at the end where credit to the Red Sox players for playing really, really hard and behaving as if they were chasing something. But realistically, even when they were talking about running the table at the end of the season, even if they'd done that, they wouldn't have made the playoffs. They haven't been in position to play like super meaningful games. I think that the last truly are they in position? Like maybe that Mets series at the beginning of September. That's about it for the last 3 years. And it's a pretty staggering development given how accessible the playoffs have become, how quickly we've seen teams flipping things around. And I think that one of the really interesting things to watch this offseason, we're used to the East Division, to the coasts being the places where there was spending, right? This past offseason, we suddenly saw a bit of a change, and it was Central teams that were spending a little bit of money, not going bananas, but you saw the Royals spending on the likes of Seth Lugo and outbidding the Red Sox for Seth Lugo. Seth Lugo is a guy who ended up being an all-star, being an ace caliber pitcher, being a game 2 starter for Kansas City. Those were difference making deals. And actually in some ways, the team building of 2024 was crystallized with the Red Sox Royals trade of John Schreiber for David Sandlin, a minor league pitcher, right? Sandlin is a guy who has great stuff. Really interesting upside. The Red Sox are hopeful. We talked to Justin Willard a couple weeks ago, hopeful that they can tap into the potential for a starter who's able to sit in the high 90s and have a really nasty pitch mix, but with uneven performance in the minor leagues. Okay, he's a couple years away from contributing. The Royals got John Schreiber. John Schreiber had a 444 OPS against after the All-Star break. He ended up being nails for them in a year when they made the playoffs by 1 game. So the Red Sox had, were very explicit about not trading off future wins for present wins for future wins, or future wins for present wins before the start of the season. The Royals were pretty explicit about doing so. They're in the playoffs because of it. And, I think that as a result of, I think that the Red Sox feel that, rightly feel the scrutiny that should come from 3 straight off seasons not being in the playoffs. And it does feel like they're okay, it's time to really value 2025. I don't know, Tom, you were there on the postmortem day. Did you feel like there was a clear change of tone in the organization?
Yeah, clear is probably the point of contention here, right? I think there was definitely more lip service being paid to it is time now to act like we're a team that wants to win the division. I thought that was great. But didn't you kind of feel that last year? I kind of felt in the post-mortem days that followed the 2023 season, the heady days of Full Throttle, right, that they were going to go back after this. And I know Tom Warner regrets using those words and has talked about what he meant and all that. But we absolutely spent weeks with the arrival of Craig Breslow and the discussion of spending money, believing that this team would be there in 2024, at least being a more legitimate playoff contender. And maybe they were, right? At 10 games above 500 at the All-Star break. And at the trade deadline, they did go get relief pitchers that I certainly thought would help this group at the end, that they traded away 10 prospects in return for guys who were supposed to help them make the playoffs. That failed miserably, obviously. And so now the question is, Have they finished the rebuild of the foundation, right? When we go back through what's happened over the last 6 years, they let Dave Dombrowski go because they wanted to build a more sustainable model, a team that could contend for playoffs and deep October runs year after year after year. They brought Chaim Bloom in to rebuild the foundation upon which you can build all of that. And I think we all agree he did that. But he wasn't able, other than 2021, he wasn't able to sort of add that piece or two, the Seth Lugos of the world, if you will, that could put this team over the top and sort of shorten the wait, right? To make them the Kansas City Royals of 2024 that go from 100 plus losses back into the playoffs. So they weren't able to do that. So in comes Craig Breslow, and it hasn't quite been a year yet as we talk. And so the question is, what is he being asked to do, or what is he planning to do? I can't help but think about the offseason when in consecutive days we found out about the addition of Lucas Giolito, but then the trading of Chris Sale. So you were kind of back to the zero sum of where you were pitching wise. The team needs pitching. It needs top end pitching. That hasn't changed in a year. Will they go either spend the money or the prospect capital to bring in a top of the rotation starter? That hasn't changed in a year. And if they don't do that, Alex, I don't know if they are legitimately more of a division winning contender than they were a year ago. Do you think this is the winter they will go do that?
So the answer comes with caveats, right? Like, which isn't a great starting point. But we asked Craig Breslow even before the end of the season, like, do you need a number one starter? And he said, well, every team would love to have one, and there are different ways to get one, right? So it was hedging a little bit. I think that the question is, do you grab an established number one starter, or do you kind of roll the dice on saying, like, we really like some of this pitcher's traits, and we believe that we can get more out of him, and thus we can turn him into it, right? Like, how would we feel like if the offseason was signing a Lugo equivalent? Like, how would we feel about that, right? Like, I don't think anyone would feel like they had answered the number one question, but there's a chance that they would ultimately get to that. Now, I don't know that that's good enough for the Red Sox this offseason, given the kind of like given the kind of ire and frustration with the way that they've operated for a number of years now, and the fact that they haven't had aggressive moves to say, like, this is a ceiling guy, right? Like, this is the guy who's going to transform the win expectations if he performs to his career track rather than requiring a breakout. This is the guy who's going to propel the team forward. It's a pretty good market to be able to really like aggressively find, really good pitchers, right? Like, you have Blake Snell back on the market. That guy is a monster. Like, I talked to Kyle Snyder, the Rays pitching coach, about him. Kyle Snyder couldn't have had more glowing things to say about what he believes Blake Snell is going to be for the next several years. He has been performing at the caliber of one of the best pitchers in baseball for several years, not necessarily always consecutively, but that's a really good pitcher. You have Max Fried in Atlanta, who's really, really good and has been the foundation of a rotation that has been a perennial powerhouse. You have Jack Flaherty, who was awesome this year, looked kind of ace-ish for both the Tigers and the Dodgers. Now that's what the Red Sox would like to sign, the kind of like 2023-24 offseason version of Jack Flaherty in all likelihood. But again, I don't know whether or not they can afford to take a bet on someone and say, like, we're going after his upside rather than getting someone who's already at the level of all-star version of Jack Flaherty. And then, of course, there's the Garrett Crochet question. And like, for me, I just think that this is the offseason where the Red Sox trade for starting pitching. They don't love the risk associated with the long-term deals of starting pitchers who are going to be in their mid and late 30s. By the way, I didn't even mention Corbin Burns as a free agent. But to me, like, their best moves have typically been the trades for pitchers. Trading for Chris Sale worked out great. They gave up a big prospect haul, worked out great, though. Trading for Josh Beckett worked out as exactly what they wanted it to be. And like, that Beckett model is kind of where Garrett Crochet is, right? Like, a guy who hasn't necessarily delivered the innings of an ace, but who has shown the stuff of an ace. and they have such a deep farm system. Craig Breslow has talked about there are more there are more talented players than there are future position spots on the diamond. So I don't know. To me, that's what this offseason feels like. You trade for starting pitching, and then you address some other needs, particularly right-handed power with less strikeouts than what they've had. That would be my guess. But that's that's a lot of speculation. Tom, you reading in the leaves? What do you see?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. I'm literally checking off the names that I have listed on my piece of paper as you talk. There's your Burns and your Fried and your Flaherty and your
You
Snell.
don't have very many notes, Tom. That's a
No,
pretty
well, that's
limited
page
list. Yeah.
one. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the headlines. You got to go deep in my binder. It's all up here, Alex. The I agree with you though. I think they are. If they were, here's the concern, and again, you detailed this in your piece, but I couldn't help but think over the last couple of months that it was. The Seth Lugos, the Shota Imanagas, right? The guys that they were purportedly in on, who, whether through their aversion to risk or their inability to or unwillingness to up the ante in what they would pay, not get those guys. Zach Eflin, I spent a lot of last year talking about he probably would have single-handedly helped you get to the playoffs last year. If you had what he did with Tampa in 2023, that might have been the difference to at least put them in a position at the trade deadline where they would have added more definitely rather than not. And by all accounts, they probably could have had Zach Eflin without breaking the bank. So if that is the concern at the free agent market, if you're not willing to extend yourself on those names, I can't see Corbin Burns walking through that door anytime soon. Or even what I would have thought midseason, what Jack Flaherty might get would be, and now you look at some of the projections on what he'll get in the offseason. And again, so I think to your point, they have a surplus of prospect capital. They have a surplus of position players that if you trade the right guys in the right combination, you should be able to bring in the type of starter you talk about. And, all of a sudden, that whole homegrown trio of players who made 30 starts, of pitchers who made 30 starts this year, starts to look a whole lot better when you talk about them as 2 and 3 and 5 with Giolito thrown in there somewhere and Cooper Criswell and Richard Fitz and Quinn Priester all backing them up with legitimate depth as they continue to mature. I would feel real good about that group if you told me the opening day starter is not on this roster right now and that the rest of the starting rotation is. I'm great with that. You got to work on the bullpen, as you said, and we'll get into right-handed power in a minute. But it all begins to me, and I think that, by the way, is a step in the right direction from a year ago where I thought before Giolito you needed 2 legitimate starting pitchers added to the mix. I think you get away with 1 right now. And I do think that making a trade is probably the smarter way to go because you probably get a younger guy who's under control and is more affordable. So we've got the rotation figured out. What about right-handed power? Could they dive into the free agent? Is Alex Bregman walking through that door, even though his teammates say there's no way he's played his last game as a member of the Astros. But would they make a splash to bring in a bat to add to the lineup?
Yeah, I hesitate a little bit. Like for me, I don't know, just viscerally, I don't really feel like Bregman is the right target necessarily. And I for a number of reasons. I think that the power has played well the power has played really well in Houston. He might be playing in the only park where his swing would work better for him than it does at Fenway, right? Like so there's a little bit of there's a little bit of funhouse mirrors with regards to the right-handed pull power. There's probably some you're going to see decline in it, right? So like, do you want 5 years down the road to be paying $20+ million a year for Alex Bregman, like doubles hitter at Fenway Park, right? And the answer is maybe, but I wonder, like, it is a tricky area because they have to address a lot of things all at once from the position side, right? They need to get more right-handed. We've heard that a lot. They need to get more right-handed power. We've heard that a lot. They need to get better defensively. We've heard that a lot. How do you do that, particularly while you do have an incoming class of stud prospects, right? Where you're hoping that they start filling up the middle of the field. But I don't know, maybe the answer is you don't worry too much about the timetable of the stud prospects and you sign best players available. I'm curious about We've obviously heard about the possibility of re-signing O'Neill, though the strikeout problem is there, and the defensive value was limited. Like, is there a way that they could explore Willy Adames? Like that guy is such a good two-way player. I actually wondered a lot about that last offseason when the Brewers had a for sale sign, which is kind of crazy to think about given where they've gone. But Adames is a really good player who is up the middle. He has experience on both sides of second base. Do you think about pairing him with Trevor Story and then using some of your glut of middle infielders? Like, do you trade out Vaughn Grissom along with one of the decorated AAA prospects in order to pursue a pitcher and get Adames to pair with Story up the middle? Like, there are different ways to approach this. It's a really interesting one because I would say there's a greater shortage of position players who fit on the free agent market, like who are just kind of like the bullseye hits, than there are pitchers.
Vaughn Grissom is interesting right now. I'm curious your thought on that. Like, did he just that little bit at the end? Because as we both know, and this isn't a Craig Breslow thing. This is a general manager, president of baseball operation thing. Nobody wants to trade the Cy Young Award winner for a player that then you flip and don't get a Cy Young winner in return.
Right.
Like you can't in 1 year get a return that is so diminished. That it makes the original trade look even worse. So Grissom, I assume would be part of a bigger package to land something that you needed. But with Christian Campbell and Vaughn Grissom both there, it's hard to imagine going to get a second baseman, isn't it?
Maybe. I guess that it depends on, like the one of the cool things about Christian Campbell is that he can go all over the field. And, right. I've talked to some he's spent most of his time this year in the infield. There are some evaluators who still just love seeing him, who believe that he's a natural outfielder. He moves really, really well, very instinctively, and believe that he could be. There are some who see him as being like a legit center field candidate. Others who think that he's more of a corner, but he has incredible versatility that allows you to proceed in a number of different fashions, right? And so that's kind of the fun part of a Christian Campbell, where he doesn't constrain what else you can explore in terms of roster upgrades.
So is anyone untouchable when you go up and down, including the entire organization, including minor leaguers? Is Roman Anthony untouchable? Is there any one player right now that you would assume they would not listen to no matter what you were throwing at them?
My guess is that the two untouchables are Anthony and Campbell, and beyond that, I don't know that there's they're right in saying that they have building blocks, but most of them are replaceable building blocks for any number of reasons. I do think that the question of Jarren Duran as an untouchable is a fascinating one because when you have a guy who performs as a five-tool player, a multifaceted player like he did this year, then the bar for being able to replace that kind of performance is awfully, awfully high. So I wonder whether or not he gets into that conversation, just in terms of making it really difficult to find a way to get better without him. But I don't know that aside from those two, who are so young and so inexpensive and so under control for so many years, of exactly the right ages, I don't know that you would treat anyone else as being off the table. You?
And well, no, but hang on, I will follow up.
Yeah.
But where does Marcelo Meyer now fit into all of this? With the injuries the last 2 years, I feel like July, early August, I was starting to think, okay, now he's ramping up. It won't be that long. Trevor Story's back. We know that. We're talking about other guys who are going to shot at second base. The injury is a real problem. I assume I can't imagine a scenario that he's with this team at the beginning of next year. Mm-hmm. But what is the timetable now? I feel like it keeps getting pushed back a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that Marcelo Meyer is expected to have a fully healthy offseason. He had already started some baseball activities down in Fort Myers after being sent there from Worcester while dealing with the lumbar strain. I think that he probably belongs in that Duran category of being close to untouchable. But I do think that by virtue of the fact that there is kind of bunching in the middle of the field, right? Like that you do have Christian Campbell now being a little bit ahead of him. I do think that the Red Sox are in a position where they're going to have to consider moving elite talent in order to acquire elite talent. And so, does Meyer fall into that category? Maybe. The problem is, part of the reason why he would fall into that category is that his value is down below where it should be and where it probably will be again, right? Like Marcelo was, let's not forget, like rewind to the futures game. Marcelo Meyer was ranked in virtually across the board as being ahead of Roman Anthony in most of the national prospect rankings, anywhere from number 2 to number 5 in most publications. So we're talking about him being up in the same air that Anthony and Campbell are now being pegged in. So like that's a pretty compelling player. The problem is, like, there should be some questions about his ability to stay on the field because we haven't seen it. There are reasons why you can explain away why he hasn't played more than 90 games in a professional season at this point. But nonetheless, kind of seeing is believing, and we have yet to see Marcelo Meyer play that full season workload. But that's the same reason why his value might be down slightly relative to some other teams. Scouts love him. The Red Sox love him. His tool set is incredible. Like there's a chance that his ceiling exceeds that of Anthony and exceeds that of Campbell, because if he's a legit above average to plus defensive shortstop, on top of being like a guy who hits for tremendous average, a guy who hits for above average power, that's an outstanding player. Like, I'm not sure if he's Gunnar Henderson, but like he'd be in the next tier of shortstops below that. Whew, that's pretty dang good. He's close to untouchable, but at a certain point, the Red Sox have to be willing to discuss people if they want to really upgrade their talent base.
All right, here's my other thought as you look forward to it. I'm going to take the fans' point of view now. I'm going to get out of the baseball operations mindset. And, you hear it all the time. I hear it all the time. Who are the stars on this team? Are they going to be homegrown? Is Tristan Casas and Jarren Duran followed by Marcelo Meyer eventually and Roman Anthony? We know Devers is going to be Devers. He's going to go do his thing. Doesn't want to be the face of the franchise. Doesn't want to speak for the franchise or any of that. Tristan Casas is more than willing to speak for the franchise on a nightly basis. Right. I mean, and I'm saying that factually, not, that the reality is, when I jump into Sideline Reporter, the media almost every night asks for Tristan Casas to come talk because he's always interesting to listen to. We know that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so are they going to be around? We said who's untouchable. Are Duran and Casas becoming the sort of leaders of this team? We know Trevor Story, if he's healthy, will be back and he'll be the veteran. But who's the next? Not talent-wise, but who's the next Mookie Betts? Who's the next Xander Bogaerts? Like, who are the centerpieces of this team going forward?
Yeah, I think that you're identifying the right ones. Now, again, no one's untouchable, which is why it's kind of interesting. To contemplate this question and to ask. I thought, Duran was also made him, was willing to speak for the team after tough losses.
Well. Right. Let's not, and through his regrettable comments at the hot mic about, he came out and was accountable and spoke and I thought handled that well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he made himself visibly contrite, which was a super important first step in terms of being able to at least acknowledge and apologize for the damage that was done there. But I think that it's a super interesting question because, like, I don't take anything for granted about where they're going with the organization. Like, is there a scenario where they would consider trading Casas and pursuing Vlad Guerrero in the next couple of years? Like, my goodness, can you imagine what that right-handed swing would look like in Fenway Park? His numbers are among the best of all time in Fenway. Do they have to reconsider Casas because they are going to be considering moving Rafi Devers off of third base in the coming years? Or do you just long-term commit to the idea that it's going to be Devers and Casas with some kind of like triangulating around maybe like between first base and DH in both of their cases, as well as maybe some third base for Devers as they look to handle that position in different ways. So the answer is it's when you identify the untouchables, you're identifying the people who you hope are going to be the future voices of the Red Sox. And so I think that like Roman Anthony is going to be really good at that. He is someone who is everyone describes the first thing that people talk about even before his talent is how insanely mature he is for a 20-year-old. He's going to be really good at handling being a voice on behalf of the team. I think that both Casas and Duran are that as long as they're on the team. And that's a kind of TBD. I do think that Trevor Story is his willingness to be a kind of like accountable public face on behalf of the fans is also significant. We'll see how he bounces back next year with with another offseason to get back to being himself.
Understanding that Craig Breslow doesn't make a deal based on public reaction. Yeah. He is solely focused on making the team on the field better. But Sam Kennedy and ownership has been scarred by the reaction to their decisions in recent years, and rightfully so, right? They still hear about Mookie Betts on a weekly, if not daily basis. Yeah. I don't know, Casas is a kind of polarizing guy, but he absolutely has built a pretty passionate fan base in Boston. Do you think the organization, part of me thinks at this point they've heard it all. What do they care, right? Like, can you get much worse PR than you have over the last few years as far as baseball decisions go? And so, does that factor into any of this? Like, do they identify a Jarren Duran and say, you know what, he's resonating with fans. He's a really good player. We need to keep those types and not do all this again. Or do you think we are right now still in a rebuilding stage where anything that makes the team better is going to happen?
Yeah, I think that it's the better happens, right? Like, making the team better is top priority number one. I think I think it makes it certainly far less likely because, and again, a lot of that is because it's really hard to replace that level of production and that level of impact, right? And so I think that what we've seen a lot of the teams that are held up as the models of perennial success, the holy grail of sustainability has been the Dodgers and the Astros. Both of those teams have actually taken a lot of their own homegrown players, enjoyed their production for 6+ years, and then said, thank you very much. Here's the gold watch and enjoy your greener pastures, right? They've replenished and they've turned over. And, that's part of the reason why, like, the Bregman conversation right now is pretty fascinating in Houston, because typically when their guys get to free agency, they've gone, right? Like, they let Carlos Correa go. They signed guys a year before, but they don't sign, they've re-signed Altuve before he's reached free agency. The Dodgers have typically let a lot of their stars go. Corey Seager is not a Dodger anymore. That guy is amazing. But they turn it over and they replace him. So
Justin Turner might have been the most popular guy on that roster. As far as popularity goes.
They did re-sign him multiple times, right? Like, so true. He's a bit of an exception. They re-signed him for 4 years. They re-signed him for 2 years. They did let him get to free agency and were willing to risk that. That was weird in its own right. I think that you worry about better. And if you think that you're going to be replacing, ultimately, like, the series of moves that gets you from John Lester to, like, Chris Sale, like, you're okay doing that as an organization, even though it offends the sensibilities of a lot of people.
That which could be the tagline for this podcast. We offend the sensibilities of a lot of people. Well, we're out of time. It was good stuff and an interesting recap. Again, if you haven't seen the piece, Alex did a great piece sort of talking about why there's no baseball at Fenway and how that needs to change. Alex, always a pleasure. We will be talking throughout the offseason, but I've really enjoyed it this year. Thanks for doing this.
It has been great. I think that we do have a couple of great conversations on the horizon with a number of with some other Red Sox with some other Red Sox officials. But this has been this has been a blast. I love the opportunity to talk about baseball with you, and I love the opportunity to be kind of part of a broader conversation that I think we're having with other people who are watching and listening.
Yeah, they are. Well, so they tell me. They keep bringing us back, and I hope you expense the 310 to Yuma poster and Ness and page it back for that, because that's a qualified expense. I think we are back Friday with Craig Breslow, so that's going to be a good one. But for now, for Alex Speier, I'm Tom Caron. Thanks so much for checking out this edition of 310 to Left. We'll see you next time.